Fairbanks Focus Alaska View is brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Alaska's first university, and the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation, bringing economic development to interior Alaska.
Good morning, and my guest this morning on Fairbanks Focus Alaska View is Dr. Bob McCoy, Director of the Geophysical Institute here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you so much, Dr. McCoy, for being on the show this morning.
Sure.
So you are new in town, and I'm curious how you found your way to the University of Alaska Fairbanks and what brought you here.
Well, I'm a space scientist. I worked for the Navy for about 30 years, first as an experimentalist building and flying space hardware, and then as a research funder. I funded space research for the Navy. And I've had an interest. I've been here actually several times. Back in the 90s, working with NASA, I actually launched a sounding rocket out of Poker into the Aurora. And I've been here to visit the Alaska Satellite Facility. So I have several colleagues here in the Geophysical Institute. So I've always been interested. And so it was sort of natural that I would sort of gravitate in this direction.
And your research focuses on space and meteorological elements.
Yeah, space weather.
Space weather.
Most of what I did was as a researcher, or develop instruments that fly on sounding rockets or satellites to study the upper atmosphere and the ionosphere. And there's a strong space physics group here at the Geophysical Institute that I was interested in working with. But at the Office of Naval Research, as a program officer, I funded research in a little bit broader area. And over the years, I became more interested in interdisciplinary things. And the Geophysical Institute is very interdisciplinary. We study volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, snow, ice, permafrost, tectonophysics, sedimentation, meteorology, all the strange weather you see around Fairbanks, and space weather, the aurora. And this is an ideal place to study all those things. There's a couple earthquakes, there's a couple of volcanoes eruptions a year, there's lots of ice, and as the sun becomes more and more active, there's lots of auroral activity here in Alaska. So it's an ideal place to come and study geoscience, geophysics.
What got you most interested in the field of study that you research in?
Well, I was interested in studying the upper atmosphere, and I got as a grad student, I built and flew a sounding rocket experiment, and that kind of spoiled me. That once that gets in your blood, that's so exciting. So I spent most of my career building and flying space instruments, and that was also what attracted me here. At Poker we have a Poker Flat research range where we launch rockets, but also south of here is at Kodiak is the Kodiak Launch Complex, where the Alaska Aerospace Corporation launches satellites. In fact, one of the last things I did before leaving the Navy was to launch a satellite out of Kodiak. Back in September, we launched a communication satellite, experimental communication satellite, into an interesting orbit where it spends about 10 hours a day over the Arctic and for communication. So I came here thinking I'd like to do more of that. And in particular, I'd like to do more of, I'd like to do things to try to drive the cost down and the frequency up of putting things in space. So that's some of my focus.
What do you hope to learn from the data that you're gathering from the satellites?
It's a variety of things. Most of the experiments that I built and flew were focused on measuring the ionosphere, and measuring electrons in the upper atmosphere and the ionosphere. That's important for a variety of things like communications. Irregularities in the ionosphere can cause satellite communication to go away. It can cause the GPS receivers to not work. So it's important to understand that. And the atmosphere affects satellites. When the sun heats the upper atmosphere, it expands. Satellite drag goes up, and satellites can start to drop out of the sky. And during solar maximum, which is in about a year or so, that can happen quite a bit. So that's my research interest. But as a program officer at the Office of Naval Research, I became really interested in interdisciplinary things. And the Geophysical Institute is very interdisciplinary. So it's not so much the focus, my interest is in any one discipline, but what about between the disciplines? And so one of the last things I was funding before I left off Naval Research was some research by some researchers who were some geologists and some space physicists. And during the Tohoku earthquake, the energy from the earthquake went up through the mantle through the ocean, through the atmosphere, up into the ionosphere, and affected the ionosphere. So we're seeing connections between the ionosphere down to the solid Earth. And then later, the tsunami that propagated out as it passed Hawaii, we could actually see the tsunami affect the ionosphere. So that's what really excites me the most, is these connections between disciplines. But typically, most researchers focus within a discipline, and researchers are focusing on their work. But if I can get researchers from one discipline talking to another, that's when the really exciting stuff starts to pop out. And I think some of the funding agencies like the National Science Foundation and the Office of Naval Research, they're beginning to realize that it's the interdisciplinary stuff where the new breakthroughs are coming.
Well, and you are giving a lecture as part of the Science for Alaska series. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're talking about?
Sure. I'm going to highlight sort of what we're talking about now. Why Alaska, just to remind people how exciting it is geophysically, volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunami, why it's a great place to come and study these things, and how the Geophysical Institute studies every parameter. We have groups that are devoted to each one of those disciplines. But then I want to take it a step further and connect to my space background and say, Alaska is so big, to really do it right, we need to put platforms in space. And there are some, but space has been typically too expensive and has taken too long. That's all I heard for the last 15, 20 years is it costs too much and takes too long. Mm-hmm. So in my last job, we were looking at ways to cut the cost and the time way down by doing things you don't normally do, like taking instruments out of airplanes, airborne instruments, package them in funny ways in pressurized boxes and launching them. And it works. And you can cut the cost down by factors of 3, 5, 10, and you can do things quickly. So sort of taking the lessons we learned from sounding rockets, the kind of thing we launch out at Poker, and taking those to what we do at Kodiak, that's a passion. And that's going to be a little bit of my theme. The title of my talk is Space Research from Alaska's Spaceports. And I want to talk about the kind of sounding rockets, the things we do out of Poker to study the aurora and space physics, and then what we can do out of Kodiak to put satellites in orbit cheaply and quickly to focus on Alaska and the geophysical environments around here.
Well, and when you say platforms in space, I'm kind of thinking the picture I get in my head is, a giant, stage or a platform. But what exactly do you mean? There's been a change in thinking. In some of the platforms, we're talking satellites. Mm-hmm. Some of them can fit in your hand. Oh, wow. Cal Poly has come up with the concept of a CubeSat that's 4 inches cubed. And a lot of universities and even some high schools are building CubeSats now. And they weigh around 1 kilogram. You can group them together, maybe 3 of them, so you got maybe 5 pounds. And include them as secondaries. We can start launching lots of small satellites. Here at the University of Alaska, we're a space grant institution, and we're actually building a couple of CubeSats. And students are actually getting to build things. Normal space programs take 10 years and cost quite a bit of money. But if you're building something tiny that students can get their hands on, they can build them in a year or two and launch it and see the data. That's exciting. That's a game changer. So I'm interested in CubeSats and nano satellites and micro satellites and taking things that you don't normally put in space, like the airborne things, and flying those cheaply and quickly out of Alaska. Fantastic. Well, before you go, please just let everyone know when your Science for Alaska lecture is happening.
It's Tuesday night at the West Mark. It starts at 7 o'clock, and it'll be about 45 minutes. So happy to talk more.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. McCoy, for being on the show.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem.
Welcome to the Fairbanks Focus Roundtable. Today we will be talking about Eielson Air Force Base. According to the FEDC's economic model, Eielson is responsible for about 10% of all the local part and full-time jobs in the borough. In February, the Air Force announced that they plan to transfer the F-16 squadron out of Eielson. Recently, these plans have been put on hold, but the uncertainty that this move placed on the community has had a huge impact, especially on the housing market in North Pole and the surrounding communities. Today with me to discuss this is, starting on my far side, is Bert Berkins, Associate Broker at Stars and Stripe Realty, Doug Isaacson, Mayor of North Pole, and Wes Madden, CEO of Madden Real Estate. Welcome to the roundtable, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we were talking a little bit before this filming, and you had some numbers about housing and the way the economy is moving in North Pole. If you could share that with us and the viewers.
Just to put it back into perspective, with the announcement that Eielson was going to be shutting down, there was a lot of panic, and a lot of people put houses on the market, as these gentlemen can attest. And then we had other uncertainty because of energy, and then also the announcement with Flint Hills going to shut down their second tower. So now we're looking at a new environment with the announcement that Eielson is going to remain at least for the next year. Mm-hmm. And so just to give you an idea, and you who are watching the show then, I have the numbers right now from City Hall. We've actually had 23 moves within the city, new hookups on utilities. That's the highest number in 7 years. Normally there's 10 this time of the year. There's already been 3 new hookups and only 2 days into August. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty aggressive. That's saying good things. It's not new inventory, it's existing inventory. Looking at the schools, the school district tells me that out at Eielson, they're expecting approximately 1,000, 1,100 kids. Eielson is telling me that they're right now at 95% occupancy for single airmen, which means the upper ranks will be out in the community, or they may have some housing. Their housing units, which they just built 900 and some odd or renovated, and they immediately finished 99 renovations of homes. They're at 80% occupancy, and leadership out there says this number fluctuates with the PCS season, which is July and September. So we still have another month coming up where there's going to be a lot of moves, which is good news for the housing market. It's good news if you're trying to sell your house and leave right away. Mm-hmm. But I would caution that it isn't the time to be trying to get the lead on next year to sell now in order, because you could depress the market. There's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Out in the school districts of North Pole, with Tickassook, Brown being on the far end of Badger, and then you got Badger Road, you got North Pole Elementary. The school district has reshuffled the boundaries, and so you're going to be seeing kids in different schools, and so the numbers will be different. North Pole Elementary will have a lot more vacancy, but they put some different programs in. So there's some room to grow in North Pole Elementary as projected. But North Pole Middle is going to be near capacity. North Pole High is as well. Mm. So there's a lot of activity. There's good population. The next thing on the horizon is what's going to happen with Flint Hills. Still trying to push the governor to consider using our own in-state Royal at a discounted price to help keep refinery jobs up. Mm-hmm. We'll see what happens, how that plays out.
And then, so that's a fairly good picture of what's going on right now. In February, what was the picture like in North Pole? Was there panic, Mr. Burke?
I think there was initially when the announcement came out. A lot of Air Force people that had been here for a few years and were expecting to rotate within the next year, like the mayor said, they tried to get a jump on things and get their house on the market now and try to get it sold. With the indecision for, 3 or 4 months there about the F-16s, a lot of buyers sort of weren't jumping into the pool either. And since the announcement came out, the buyers, again, they're not really jumping through hoops to buy a house right now, knowing that a year down the road, the same decision may be made and the F-16s are gone. Mm-hmm. The local people that have been here through all the ups and downs over the years, it doesn't really matter to them, I don't believe. So they're still buying houses. We are down about 20% this year as far as sales go compared to last year. Mm-hmm. I mean, last year wasn't a stellar year at that. I mean, we're still coming out of the the issues of 2007 and 2008, but things were picking up. So it's a sort of a double-edged sword here with the announcement. Yeah, those that have houses know that they're going to still be assigned here until next year at least, but the buyers aren't really fully committed right now. We've seen an uptick in the last few weeks, definitely, of buyers, of all the agencies showing our houses and of us showing the other agency houses. So I think it's looking good in that sense. And the July timeframe is always a slow timeframe in Alaska. Everybody thinks it's all summer that we're active, and it's not really. July, people start to get phased back into the school, get prepared for school, they get their vacations taken care of. But then August, September is when a lot of military transfers happen. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that things will pick up a little bit.
And Mr. Madden, do you think things are stabilizing now?
Well, for the last couple weeks, they have. You know, to put it in perspective, we have 215. As of Monday, we had 215 single-family homes actively on the multiple listing service in North Pole. Contrast that with last year. This time, we had, we should be in the 150s. Okay. So it's really it's kind of the law of supply and demand, which is irrefutable. I mean, we had, like Bert was saying, you got the speculation that started first of the year, February, people started putting on their houses on the market to get a jump on it. And that created a ton of supply. And what made it even worse was you didn't have the demand. So the buyer's confidence was low. So it really caused, we're down, when I looked at just single-family homes, we're down about the average sales price, we're down about $4,000 for the average sale price from last year. But it has stabilized in the last 3 weeks, which is good. We're holding at about 8 months of inventory right now, and that's just single-family homes. It doesn't include, I don't put vacant land or duplexes or condos into that, in those figures. So.
And have you seen, when Flint Hills announced they were going to shut down the refinery, did that have as much of an impact? I mean, obviously didn't have as much of an impact, but...
Shut down a tower.
The tower, I'm sorry. Yeah.
2 out of 3 towers, not the whole refinery.
Right, not the whole refinery. Did you see that? Was there a glitch there? Was that numerically significant in the housing?
Well, in a small market like North Pole, I mean, we had, 317 home sales all of last year. So, I mean, when you take 40, so when you have large numbers of and a lot of those people owned homes, it's going to make an impact on that market. I mean, it's such a small market; it can be delicate, and when you have these layoffs or proposals like this, it definitely impacts.
Yeah, the only stabilizing influence right now with the announcement of 40 jobs leaving Flint Hills is that the military is not also leaving. Right. And because they're keeping a steady PCS, the rotation of troops, and as a matter of fact might have increased it just a little bit, that's going to help offset, I think, for our housing market.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure cross my fingers.
Yeah. So what do you foresee that this winter looking like?
I don't think things are going to change very much this winter. The way I've looked at it, and a lot of the locals, I read the newspaper last week, and it gave some comments from different business people in North Pole, and I think you really have to be optimistic about the future. Again, Eielson has gone through a lot of phases over the years. I thought it was interesting. It talked about how many graduated in 1965 at Eielson. Was 51 or 52, and last year it was 51 or 52. Yet in that same time frame, the military itself hasn't grown, but North Pole has exploded. So where has that come from? That's an interesting question. I mean, because like I said, the numbers haven't significantly changed since the mid-60s. So, but I think we're going to have a good year. Interest rates are historically low. It is a great time to buy a house. You can get a lot more house than you normally could. When I first got back in real estate in the 90s in Arkansas, the rates were 7% and 8%, and they were loving it because they were talking about in the 80s it was 16%. So imagine if they were 16% now. I mean, who could really afford a house, especially up here?
Yeah, exactly.
The thing that's going to really make the market nervous or stable will be the price of energy. And that's an unknown. Right now, of course, we see that the prices are low. Hopefully, because it's an election year, the prices will remain low because there's going to be some pressure by the administration that in that regards. There's talk about limiting the commodities trading and so forth. So there's pressure on the market just because of political factors. Hopefully that means that's going to be healthy for us. But it really will play out on whether or not we can get relief into the interior with heating oil, especially space heating, and electric costs. As everyone's seen over the summer, electric costs have doubled because of fuel charges and such. So in the wintertime, for example, I was paying $100. This summer I paid $250 for electricity. How does that happen? So we've got to get a handle on that, and that's what the government is about, I guess. But also consumer demand has to put pressure on government as well to do that.
And do you see that? I mean, what are what's your typical buyer right now for a home in North Pole? Are they energy conscious? Are they looking for houses that are, that are newer, have, are well insulated, have, diverse heating systems?
Well, I think every buyer is, and it's definitely something, I think this winter was the first time I saw some homeowners where their utility costs were more than their mortgage payment. And that gets scary, So there's a huge downsize movement going on in Fairbanks, and then in North Pole, let's make no mistake about it. This all has to do with energy. I mean, if it was cheap to run Eielson, we wouldn't be moving airmen and families around. I mean, you could operate. So I think the big issue here is energy, and for that average homeowner, it's definitely something to be concerned about. And they're looking at the fuel usage and the electrical usage of these homes before they make a decision, for sure.
And that's one of the initiatives on the boroughs, the ballots on the borough is going to be air quality again, and whether we can burn wood or whether we're going to have to restrict ourselves to different fuel sources. So there's a lot to play.
That's right. Well. Yeah, that supplemental heating source. That's a huge issue. That's a big topic. There's a lot of families that made it through last winter due to the ability to be able to burn wood or coal or whatnot.
Or alternative.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of the buyers coming in, we have to educate them, though, regarding the energy costs, because depending on what market they're coming from, the price of houses isn't really that bad here. But once we get them the copy of the fuel bill for the previous year, and they see that it could run them possibly $1,000 counting electricity and heating oil and wood. I mean, you can't buy nearly as much house. They look at a 3,000 or 3,500 square foot house and say, oh man, that's a really good price. Well, can you afford to heat it during the winter is the key. Down south, it's not that big of an issue, but up here it is.
Right, yeah.
And we make sure we explain to buyers, that this is what the previous owner used for fuel and electricity, but there's definitely some things that you can do to conserve your fuel and electric usage, and a lot of that's through education. GVA does the energy audits. They'll come to your house, and that's a great program that they have. And there's a ton of information out there on alternative heating sources and
there's
ways to
swap
improve.
out programs.
That's right.
With the borough and the state.
Yeah, so there's ways that homeowners, that we can kind of, or potential buyers that we can kind of make that, the energy cost more palatable.
Yeah.
And those are the dialogues that Bert and I and other real estate professionals in North Pole are having with buyers.
And another thing, every family is going to consume energy differently.
Right.
I sold a house recently. They had 5 laptops. They had desktops. They were consuming energy all the time. The next family coming in may have smaller kids and not have those assets in the house, and their electric bill may be half as much. You just never know.
Right.
So, so there are obstacles. And in closing, I guess we could just get, are you, if everyone can answer this individually, are you hopeful? Is there hope?
I just opened a branch office in North Pole, so I wouldn't have done that as a business owner if I wasn't hopeful on the North Pole market. I believe in North Pole. It's I think, we've gone through bumps in the road in our economy, in our housing market before, and we bounced back. And I'm extremely hopeful that that this is going to be, we're going to end up positive on this.
I'm also very bullish. Been fighting this fight for, I guess now 12 years on council and as mayor, and longer as a business and community member. Our better times are ahead. We have definite challenges, but we also have some momentum, some movement on some energy issues. We have movement on diversification of economy, some industry coming. North Pole is still Alaska's industrial center for energy. We have 2 of the 4 refineries operating. We got to make sure it continues. We have generation, electric generation that can actually fuel the entire interior for the most part out in North Pole. We got to get that a little bit cheaper, but we've got some activities happening that is in the near term, 3 years down the road, it's going to change the economics. Our challenge will be now till then, but I'm still bullish. We're going to see a lot of good things happen.
I agree. I think we all have to be hopeful about it. I mean, once we all turn negative, I mean, that's just going to bring negativity to the community, and we're not going to go anywhere whatsoever. We just opened up Stars and Stripes Realty a year ago, knowing that the North Pole is going to be here for a long time, and the military is a major source of it, and we want to be there to support them. I mean, they're doing things for us that some of us have done in the past in the military, but the active duty that are there now, I mean, they're doing a lot more than we had to do, 20 years ago with all the wars that are going on. So,
all right. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you, gentlemen, very much for agreeing to be on the roundtable, and thank you for joining us. See you next time.